This land is no longer yours. Leave now.
But sir, we have lived here for generations.
What happens when a legal system, something that's supposed to create order, actually becomes a tool for oppression? Well, we're about to dive into how changing the rules of who owns land didn't just create some inequality. It literally pushed an entire community to its breaking point and kicked off a bloody rebellion.
But before we even get into the how or why, let's just start with the final cost. 2,300. That's how many rebels were killed. It's a huge number, and it's a really stark reminder that this isn't just a story about laws and land. This is about the lives that were lost when a system fails so catastrophically.
So that really brings us to the core question, right? What could possibly drive people to this level of violence? To get to the answer, we've got to peel back the layers of the system that controlled every single part of their lives.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 1921, and we're in the Malabar region of India. This is where a massive peasant uprising just exploded, and it really shook the British administration right to its core.
And in this conflict, you had two very clear sides. On one side, you've got the Mappila Muslim tenants. These are the farmers, the people actually working the land. And on the other side, a really powerful alliance, the British colonial government and their allies, the local elite landlords, the Nair and Nambudiri Brahmins.
So what was the engine that was really driving all of this? Well, it all came down to a deeply, deeply exploitative landlord system. And this economic setup, it wasn't just some background detail, it was the absolute heart of the conflict.
Right at the center of this whole system was a figure they called the Genmai. These were the Nambudiri Brahmin landlords, and their power got a massive boost from the British. Their traditional authority was basically supercharged into absolute legal ownership of the land. And that, right there, was a game-changing shift.
See, before the British showed up, Mappila tenants had what were called customary occupancy rights. It was this unwritten rule, but everyone understood it. You had a right to live on and work the land. Well, the new colonial system just wiped that all away. All of a sudden, landlords had the power to evict tenants for pretty much any reason, whenever they felt like it.
And just look at these numbers. They tell a story of just staggering inequality. The Genmani landlord, they could take up to 60% of everything grown, plus slap on extra fees. And the Mappila tenant, the one doing all the backbreaking work, sometimes they were left with as little as 2%. I mean, the system was just built for conflict. And it got worse. It wasn't just the rent, which could balloon to 80% of the harvest. There are these crippling fines just to renew your lease, which basically trapped people in a cycle of debt they could never escape. All those traditional protections they used to have, gone. And they were replaced by a system where physical and even cultural oppression were just common tools to keep people in line.
Which kind of makes you wonder, how is any of this even legal? And that brings us to the role of the colonial legal system itself. It basically took generations of custom and tradition and twisted it into the rigid, one-sided language of a modern contract.
And that's the crucial question, isn't it? Why did the courts, which are supposed to be impartial, always consistently side with the landlords? The answer isn't so much in what the law said, but in how the courts decided to interpret it.
The courts just systematically tore down any protections the tenants had. First, they took this British idea of absolute ownership and applied it to the landlords, erasing any traditional obligations they had. Next, they just ignored all those unwritten customs, calling them legally worthless. The only thing that mattered were written contracts, which, you guessed it, were always written to favor the landlord. And at the end of the day, the British administration cared way more about getting stable tax money than they did about justice for the farmers. This whole situation led to these legal tricks like something called melkanam. This was a really devastatingly clever loophole. A landlord could create a new lease right on top of an existing tenant's lease, give it to somebody else, and the courts would back them up. It was basically a way to legally evict the original family. It wasn't just a loophole, it was a weapon.
And the impact was just enormous. In the years leading right up to the rebellion, we're talking about around 10,000 evictions. So this wasn't just a few isolated cases here and there. This was a widespread crisis, sanctioned by the legal system, that was systematically pushing people out of their homes.
So, the law was the framework. But now, let's look at the people who actually enforced it. This is where the colonial state really showed its iron fist, connecting the dots between the legal system and straight-up physical force.
The Brahmin administrators were the critical link in this chain.
In their intelligence reports, they totally dismissed the economic problems and just framed the whole thing as religious fanaticism. In the courts, they were the ones upholding the very laws causing all the misery, and from their desks, they coordinated the special police forces that were sent in to crush the revolt they knew was coming.
And the main tool they used for that suppression was the Malabar Special Police, or the MSP. Now, this force was deliberately put together with non-Muslim recruits and was deployed with one single-minded purpose: to crush the Moplah Rebellion. So this brings us to the final and really tragic chapter of the uprising, the aftermath. The rebellion was met with just overwhelming force, leading to its complete suppression and leaving behind a very difficult legacy.
And the end came incredibly quickly. The rebellion explodes in August of 1921. Just 3 months later, in November, the Malabar Special Police are sent in. By early 1922, the whole thing had been officially and totally crushed.
And this chart really puts the human cost into perspective. Remember that number we started with, the 2,300 rebels killed? Well, on top of that, another 16,000 were arrested. That means for every one person killed, about 7 more were taken prisoner. The scale of the suppression was just immense. It was designed not just to end the rebellion, but to make sure nobody ever even thought about trying it again.
From the colonial point of view, the result was simple. The administration's iron fist had successfully stabilized the region. It did exactly what it was meant to do: secure British interests no matter what the human toll was. On its own brutal terms, the system worked perfectly.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty unsettling question. The Malabar Rebellion was a specific moment in history, sure, but its story feels so universal. It really forces us to ask, when any system of power, whether it's legal or economic or political, consistently ignores the grievances of its people, is violent conflict at some point just inevitable?